The ambassador from the Cathari hegemony stood at the observation window of the diplomatic vessel, watching the blue and green planet rotate slowly in the void. Earth. Such an unremarkable world in an unremarkable system, and yet it had become the center of the greatest mystery in Federation history. "You are certain about this?" asked High Diplomat Tora, her crystalline wings folding against her back as she turned to face the human translator. "The Council requires absolute clarity before we proceed." Captain Sarah Chen nodded, her dark eyes reflecting the starlight. "The Federation Council wants to know why humanity refuses to surrender. We have prepared a complete historical archive for your review." Tora made a clicking sound that her translator identified as skepticism. "Your species is young, less than 300 years since your first contact. In that time, you have faced 17 different extinction-level threats from various hostile species. Each time, you were offered terms of surrender that would have preserved your population. Each time, you refused." "That is correct. And each time, against all mathematical probability, you have survived." Tora's 6 eyes blinked in a pattern that suggested deep confusion. "The Council has calculated the odds of your species still existing today. The number is so small that our computers struggle to express it." Sarah smiled, and something in that expression made Tora feel an emotion her species rarely experienced. It took her several moments to identify it as unease. "Perhaps," Sarah said, "you should start with the First Contact War. That is where it all began." The Cathari diplomatic team assembled in the viewing chamber 3 hours later. There were 12 of them, representing the major species of the Federation Council. They were biologists, historians, psychologists, and military strategists. Each had been selected because of their expertise in understanding species behavior. They had come to solve the human problem. For over 2 centuries, the Federation had watched humanity with growing concern, not because humans were aggressive or expansionist. In fact, compared to most young species, they were remarkably peaceful. The problem was something else entirely. Humans did not know when to quit. The viewing screen activated, and the archive began to play. The timestamp showed the year 2157 by Earth's calendar. "This is the historical record of what humans call the First Contact War," said the archive narrator, a calm AI voice. "The Dreth Empire made contact with humanity on this date." The screen showed Earth as it had been then. A smaller civilization, still confined mostly to their home system. A few colonies on Mars, mining operations in the asteroid belt, research stations on the moons of Jupiter. Primitive by Federation standards. And then the Dreth arrived. The Dreth were one of the most feared species in the galaxy at that time. They were massive creatures, standing 4 meters tall, covered in armor-like scales that could deflect most energy weapons. They had conquered 47 species and destroyed a dozen more. Their empire stretched across 3 galactic arms. When their scout fleet entered the Sol system, humanity had no means of resisting them. The first battle lasted 11 minutes. Earth's combined military forces were reduced to debris. The Dreth commander, a warlord named Cresseth, broadcast a simple message to the surviving humans. "You will surrender your planet, your resources, and your population. Half of you will be enslaved. The other half will be processed for protein. This is the only offer you will receive." The historical record showed the response from Earth's governments. Leaders from around the world gathered in an emergency session. The military advisors presented their assessment. Humanity had no chance. Their weapons were toys compared to Dreth technology. Their ships were slow, fragile, and few in number. Surrender was the only logical option. The vote was taken. The result was unanimous. Humanity refused. Tora paused the recording. "This is the first instance of the behavior we do not understand. Your military had been destroyed. Your planet was defenseless. The Dreth offered terms that would have allowed half your species to survive. By any rational calculation, surrender was the optimal choice." Sarah nodded. "That is true." "Then why did you refuse?" Sarah considered the question for a long moment. "Have you ever heard the human word spite?" The translator struggled with the concept. An emotion related to causing harm to others even at cost to oneself. This is considered a negative trait in most species. For humans it can be, but there is another side to it. Sarah's voice was quiet but firm. When someone tells a human that they cannot do something, that they must accept defeat, something happens in our minds. We become determined. Determined to do what? Determined to prove them wrong, no matter what it costs. The recording resumed. The historical archive showed what happened next. The Dreth, confident in their victory, began landing troops on Earth. They expected no resistance. What they found instead became known in human history as the 300 Days. Humans could not match the Dreth in direct combat. A single Dreth warrior could kill dozens of human soldiers. Their armor was impervious to human bullets. Their weapons could level buildings with a single shot. So humans stopped fighting directly. They hid, they waited, they watched. And then they began to learn. The Dreth did not guard their ships carefully. Why would they? The primitive humans had no space capability left, but humans were clever with machines, and desperate people can be very creative. A young engineer named Thomas Park led a team of 12 volunteers into a Dreth landing craft. They did not try to fight the guards. They simply waited until the guards were distracted, then slipped aboard. They studied the systems. They took notes. They stole data chips. Most of them died during the escape. Thomas Park survived with burns covering half his body and enough information to change the course of the war. Within 6 months, human scientists had reverse-engineered basic Dreth energy weapons. They could not reproduce them perfectly, but they could create something similar, something that could actually hurt a Dreth warrior. Within a year, they had modified human spacecraft to be faster and more maneuverable. They could not match Dreth firepower, but they could run and hide and strike when least expected. The Dreth began losing soldiers, not many at first, a few here, a few there, but losses they had never expected to take. Cresseth ordered more troops to Earth. He would crush this rebellion with overwhelming force. But humans had learned another trick. They had captured Dreth communication equipment and learned to decode their transmissions. When the reinforcement fleet arrived, human fighters were waiting in the asteroid belt. They did not engage directly. Instead, they used captured Dreth missiles to trigger a cascade of asteroid impacts. 3 Dreth cruisers were destroyed before they understood what was happening. This was the moment that caught the Federation's attention. A primitive species, facing certain extinction, had actually damaged a Dreth fleet. It should have been impossible. The Dreth responded by bombarding Earth's major cities from orbit. Billions died. The destruction was absolute. And still, humans did not surrender. They retreated underground. They built hidden bases in caves and tunnels and the ruins of their cities. They continued to fight, continued to steal Dreth technology, continued to adapt. The war lasted 17 years. In the end, it was not humanity that won. The Dreth Empire became distracted by a conflict with another major power and decided that Earth was not worth the continued investment. The primitive humans were too much trouble for too little gain. They left. But before they went, Cresseth sent one final message to Earth. The historical record preserved his words. You have not won, you have merely persisted. Your world is in ruins. Your population is reduced to less than 2 billion. You have lost everything. The human response came from a woman named Admiral Yuki Tanaka. She had lost her husband, her children, and her left arm in the war. She spoke into the camera with a face that showed no expression at all. We are still here, she said. Are you? Tora stopped the recording again. Her wings were trembling slightly. This is the pattern, she said. This is what we do not understand. You lost billions of lives. Your civilization was nearly destroyed, and you call this a victory. Sarah's smile was sad but unwavering. We call it survival, and for humans, survival is its own kind of victory. The other diplomats were stirring now, exchanging glances through various forms of communication. The Cathari military strategist, a male named Vortex, leaned forward. Show us the next war, he said. Show us the Silence Plague. Sarah nodded and advanced the archive. The timestamp showed 2201. The room fell silent as the new horror began to unfold. The Silence Plague was not a war in the traditional sense. There were no enemy fleets, no invading armies, no demands for surrender. There was only death. It began on a human colony world called New Shanghai. A research team had discovered an abandoned alien artifact buried deep beneath the planet's surface. The artifact was millions of years old, from a species that had long since vanished from the galaxy. They opened it. What emerged was not a weapon or a treasure. It was a disease, a biological agent designed by a long-dead civilization for purposes that no one could determine. Perhaps it had been a tool of war. Perhaps it had been an accident. The origin did not matter. What mattered was what it did. The Silence Plague earned its name because of what happened to its victims. First, they lost the ability to speak. Then they lost the ability to think. Their minds simply stopped. They became silent, empty shells, still breathing but no longer alive in any meaningful way. And it spread with terrifying speed. Within 6 months, New Shanghai was dead. Not destroyed, but dead. The buildings still stood, the lights still worked, the automated systems still functioned. But every human on the planet had fallen silent. Then it appeared on Earth. The archive showed the footage that humans had preserved from those days. Empty streets, abandoned vehicles, and everywhere the silent ones, standing or sitting or lying where they had fallen, their eyes open but seeing nothing. Quarantine failed. The plague could be transmitted through any contact, any shared surface, any recycled air. It moved faster than humanity could run. Within 2 years, Earth's population had dropped from 8 billion to less than 500 million. The colonies were even worse. Some had been completely silenced. The Federation had offered to help. They had advanced medical technology, research facilities that dwarfed anything humanity possessed, but there was a condition. "Show them the offer," Tora said quietly. The archive displayed a document, a treaty of surrender, written in the neutral language of the Federation. Humanity would become a protected species. Their worlds would become Federation nature preserves. Humans would be relocated to designated habitats where they could be monitored, studied, and protected from themselves. They would have no autonomy, no self-governance, no freedom to explore or expand. But they would survive. The Federation guaranteed it. Their medical technology could halt the plague, perhaps even cure it. All humanity had to do was give up their independence. The human response was recorded for history. A woman named President Clara Mendez stood before a camera in a bunker deep beneath what had once been Geneva. Behind her, the sounds of the silent ones could be heard scratching at the sealed doors. "We thank the Federation for their offer," she said. Her voice was steady despite the fear that must have filled her. "But humanity cannot accept. We would rather die free than live as exhibits in your zoo." Vortex made a sound of frustration. "This is madness. You were facing extinction, total extinction. The plague could not be stopped by any technology you possessed." Sarah nodded. "That is correct. We had no cure, no treatment, no hope by any rational standard." "Then how are you still here?" The archive answered for her. After President Mendez's refusal, the remaining human scientists retreated to a facility in Antarctica. It was the most isolated place on Earth, the hardest for the plague to reach. There, a team of fewer than 200 researchers worked in desperate conditions to find a solution. They did not find a cure, they found something else. The plague, they discovered, required living neural tissue to propagate. It could not survive in dead matter, and it could not adapt to significant changes in human brain chemistry. The solution they developed was not elegant, it was not safe, it was barely even science. They called it the burn protocol. Using a combination of drugs, electrical stimulation, and what could only be described as controlled brain damage, the researchers found a way to temporarily alter human neural patterns enough to make them immune to the plague. The process was excruciating. It had a 40% fatality rate. And those who survived were changed, their memories fragmented, their personalities altered. But they survived. The burn protocol was distributed to every surviving human community on Earth and the colonies. Those who chose to undergo it had a chance to live. Those who refused, or for whom the process failed, joined the silent ones. It took another decade, but slowly, humanity began to recover. The plague burned itself out, having run out of victims to claim. The survivors rebuilt, scarred but alive. Tora was silent for a long time after this part of the archive ended. "You subjected yourselves to brain damage rather than accept our protection," she finally said. "We subjected ourselves to a chance," Sarah corrected. "That is different." "How?" Sarah thought about how to explain it. "When humans face impossible odds, we have two choices. We can accept that the situation is impossible and give up, or we can refuse to accept it and try anyway. The second choice is often painful. It is often foolish. It often fails, but sometimes it creates possibilities that did not exist before." The Cathari psychologist spoke for the first time. "You are describing irrational behavior, the deliberate rejection of logical analysis in favor of emotional response. Perhaps, or perhaps we are describing a different kind of logic, one that your species has not encountered before." Vortex waved a limb dismissively. "Show us the Void War. That is the conflict the Council is most concerned about." Sarah's expression became more serious. "The Void War is still classified. I am not authorized to share all of its details. The Federation Council requires complete information." Then the Federation Council will have to make a formal request through proper diplomatic channels. However, I can share the public record. The archive advanced again. The timestamp showed 2298, less than 30 years ago by Earth's calendar. The room fell into tense silence. The Void War had not been against any living species. It had been against something far worse. The entities that humanity came to call the Void had no true name. They existed in the spaces between stars, in the dark matter that filled the gaps in the universe. They had no physical form that could be detected, no ships that could be tracked, no weapons that could be understood. What they had was hunger. The first sign of the Void was the disappearance of human colony ships. Vessels simply vanished, leaving no wreckage, no distress calls, no evidence of what had happened. Then entire stations went dark. Then a planet. Humanity tried to fight back. Their weapons did nothing. The Void could not be shot, could not be bombed, could not be affected by any technology that humanity or the Federation possessed. The Federation's response was to quarantine human space. They established a barrier of warning buoys and automated defenses, not to protect humanity, but to protect themselves. The Void seemed to be attracted to human minds specifically. No one knew why. Inside the quarantine zone, humanity was alone. The archive showed the final battle of the Void War, as much of it as was public record. A fleet of human ships, the largest ever assembled, positioned at the edge of a dying system. The star had been drained of its energy. The planets were empty husks. The Void was there, invisible but palpable. The human admiral, a man named James Wright, made a final broadcast. "We have tried every weapon in our arsenal. We have tried every strategy we know. Nothing works against these things, but we are not done yet." The fleet did not advance to attack. Instead, they scattered, spreading out across the system in a pattern that made no tactical sense. And then one by one, they began to broadcast. Not weapons, not signals, music. The archive recording captured it. Thousands of human voices, singing in hundreds of languages, ancient songs and new ones, hymns and folk tunes, opera and rock and the wordless vocalizations of human emotion. The Void reacted. For the first time since the war began, the entities that existed in the dark between stars became visible. They were shapes that hurt to look at, geometries that should not exist, patterns that the human mind was not designed to process. And they were listening. The singing continued, the fleet held position, and slowly, impossibly, the Void began to withdraw. No one knew why. The recordings became classified at that point, sealed by order of Earth's highest authorities, but the public record showed the result. The Void pulled back. The quarantine was lifted. Humanity survived. Tora turned to Sarah. "What happened? How did you drive them away with music?" Sarah was silent for a moment. "That information is classified." "Captain Chen, the Federation Council requires an answer. How did humanity defeat the Void?" Sarah met Tora's 6 eyes with her own too. "We did not defeat them. We negotiated." Negotiated with entities that had destroyed entire planets, entities that fed on consciousness itself. "Yes. How is that possible?" Sarah's smile returned, but it was different now. Sadder, older. The Void were not mindless predators, ambassador. They were lonely. They had existed in the darkness for millions of years, perhaps billions. They had never encountered anything like human consciousness before. They did not attack us out of malice. They attacked because they wanted to understand us, and they did not know any other way. And the music. Music is the one thing humans create that has no survival value. It does not feed us, does not shelter us, does not protect us. We create it purely because we want to, because it brings us joy. Sarah's voice softened. The Void had never encountered joy before. When they heard it, they wanted to understand. And when they began to understand, they stopped being hungry. Tora sat back, her wings folding tightly against her body. This is not possible. You cannot negotiate with something that exists outside normal spacetime. You cannot teach joy to entities that have no concept of emotion. And yet we did. The room was silent. Finally, Vortex spoke. "Show us the current conflict, the hegemony war." Sarah shook her head. "That conflict is ongoing. I cannot share active military intelligence." "Then tell us this much. The Cathari hegemony has offered humanity generous terms of surrender. Your forces are outnumbered 500 to 1. Your technology is inferior. You cannot win this war by any measure." "That is correct." "Then why do you continue to fight?" Sarah stood and walked to the observation window. Earth hung in the void behind her, a small blue marble in an ocean of darkness. Do you know what that planet has endured? She asked quietly. In the 300 years since we left our world, we have faced extinction 7 times. Actual extinction. Not the loss of territory or resources or pride, but the complete end of our species. We are aware of your history. Then you should understand something about us by now. We do not surrender because we cannot conceive of a future without hope. Even when every calculation says we should lose, even when every rational analysis proves we have no chance, we find a way to keep trying. Not because we are brave or strong or special, because we simply do not know how to stop. Tora rose from her seat. That is not an answer, that is a psychological defect. Sarah turned to face her. Perhaps, or perhaps it is the reason my species is still here when dozens of others have fallen. The Dreth thought we would surrender. The Silence Plague thought we would die. The Void thought we would be consumed. They were all wrong. The Cathari will not be wrong. No, then let me ask you something, Ambassador. Your hegemony has conquered 43 species. How many of them are still fighting? Tora did not answer. That is what I thought. They surrendered, they gave up. They accepted that resistance was futile and submitted to your rule. And now they are slaves, their cultures erased, their futures determined by others. Sarah's voice grew harder. Humanity will never accept that fate. We would rather burn our own worlds than see them taken. We would rather die standing than live kneeling. That is irrational. That is human. The diplomatic session ended there. Tora needed time to process what she had learned, and the other diplomats were clearly struggling with similar difficulties. Sarah returned to her quarters and sat in the darkness for a long time. The truth, of course, was more complicated than what she had told the Federation. Humanity was not simply stubborn or proud or incapable of surrender. They were all of those things, yes, but they were also something else. They were afraid. Afraid of what would happen if they stopped fighting. Afraid of what they might become if they gave up. Afraid that the universe was so dark and so hostile that the only thing keeping them alive was their refusal to die. It was not courage, it was terror transformed into action. But the Federation did not need to know that. Let them think humanity was brave. Let them think humans were warriors without fear. The truth served no purpose here. What mattered was that when the Cathari attacked tomorrow, as they surely would, humanity would be ready to fight again. Not because they believed they could win, but because they believed in something more important than victory. They believed in themselves, in their ability to endure, to adapt, to survive. And that belief, Sarah had come to understand, was the most powerful weapon any species could possess. The stars continued their ancient dance outside her window, and somewhere in the darkness, war was coming. Humanity would be waiting. The Cathari offensive began at dawn, standard Earth time. Ambassador Tora watched from the command deck of the diplomatic vessel as the hegemony's attack fleet emerged from fold space. 300 warships, each one larger than anything humanity could field. Their weapons arrays lit up the void with a cold blue light that promised destruction. The humans have been given one final opportunity to surrender, the Cathari fleet commander reported. They have refused. Of course they had. Tora was no longer surprised. Proceed with the attack. The first wave of Cathari fighters descended on Earth's orbital defenses. These were stations built from salvaged alien technology and human ingenuity, a patchwork of different systems that should never have worked together. By every military assessment, they should have fallen in minutes. They lasted hours. Human pilots flew ships that were held together with repair patches and desperate hope. They used tactics that no Cathari strategist had anticipated, because no rational species would ever attempt them. They flew directly into enemy formations, accepting certain death to take just one more enemy with them. They crashed their damaged vessels into Cathari cruisers rather than eject to safety. The Cathari military strategist on the diplomatic vessel was monitoring the battle with growing disbelief. They are not retreating. Even when their ships are disabled, they continue firing. Even when their systems fail, they ram us. That is what humans do, Tora said quietly. She had spent the night reviewing the historical archives again, searching for something she had missed, a weakness, an explanation, a way to make these impossible creatures understand that they could not win. She had found nothing, only more stories of sacrifice and survival. The battle raged for 7 hours. By the end, the Cathari had lost 32 ships. For humanity, those losses were insignificant. For the hegemony, which had not lost a single vessel in conquest for over a century, they were unprecedented. And Earth's orbital defenses still held. We are receiving a transmission from the human commander. a communication officer reported. "Display it." The screen flickered and a human face appeared. A woman, older than Sarah, with silver hair and scars that mapped decades of conflict across her features. Her uniform was torn and stained with what might have been blood, and one of her eyes was swollen shut. Behind her, alarms were wailing. "I am Admiral Helena Vance," the woman said, "Commander of Earth Defense Force. I understand your ambassador wishes to know why we do not surrender." Tora leaned forward. "That is correct." Admiral Vance laughed. It was not a pleasant sound. "Let me tell you a story, Ambassador. When I was a child, my grandmother used to talk about the old days, before first contact, before we knew there was anyone else out there. She told me that humans used to believe they were alone in the universe, that we were the only thinking creatures in all of creation. That is a common belief among pre-contact species." "Yes, but here is the thing she told me that I never forgot. She said that even when humans believed they were alone, they never gave up hope. They built telescopes to search the sky for others. They sent messages into the void, hoping someone would answer. They dreamed of a future where they would not be alone." The Admiral's good eye was bright with something that Tora could not name. "And then they found out the truth. They found out that the universe is full of life, but most of that life wants to kill us. They found out that we are small and weak and young. They found out that hope is a luxury that the galaxy does not afford." Her voice hardened. "But they kept hopping anyway. My grandmother survived the Dreth War. My mother survived the Silence Plague. I survived the Void War. And each of us, when we looked at our children, made them the same promise. We will never stop fighting for your future. No matter what comes, no matter how bad it gets, we will find a way." "Admiral Vance, your defenses are failing. You cannot hold much longer. Surrender now, and we will spare your civilian population." The Admiral smiled. It was the same smile Sarah had shown Tora, the one that carried something old and fierce and unbreakable. "Let me ask you a question, Ambassador. In all your conquests and all your victories, have you ever faced a species that truly did not care if they died?" "All species care about survival. It is the most fundamental drive." "You're wrong. Humans care about survival, yes, but we care about something more. We care about meaning. We care about legacy. We care about the idea that our deaths might matter, that our children might live because we did not give up." The Admiral gestured to someone off-screen. "I am about to order my fleet to execute Protocol Omega. Do you know what that is?" Tora did not. Every human vessel in this system is about to overload its reactor core. The resulting explosions will create a chain reaction in our orbital defense network. The energy released will be equivalent to approximately 300 nuclear detonations. The Cathari fleet commander broke into the channel. "Admiral, that will not destroy our fleet. Our shields can withstand." "I am not trying to destroy your fleet." Admiral Vance's smile widened. "I am trying to destroy Earth." Silence fell across the diplomatic vessel. "Your species requires our world," the Admiral continued. "Your biological research depends on it. Your colonization plans require it. If we destroy it ourselves, you gain nothing from this war. Your victory becomes meaningless. You would destroy your own homeworld. We would do whatever is necessary to deny you victory. That is what you do not understand about us, Ambassador. We are not fighting to win. We are fighting to make sure that if we lose, you lose too." Tora turned to the fleet commander. "Is she telling the truth? Can their weapons do what she claims?" The commander's face had gone pale. "Our analysis suggests, yes. If they detonate their orbital network simultaneously, the atmospheric ignition could render Earth uninhabitable, perhaps permanently. And they would do this, kill their own world." The Admiral answered for them. "We have already evacuated our essential population. Colony ships departed 12 hours ago before your fleet arrived. Earth is not our only home. It is simply our oldest, and we would rather see it burn than see it enslaved." "You are insane." "We are human. There is a difference, but I understand why you cannot see it." Tora sat back in her chair. For the first time in her career, she did not know what to do. The Cathari hegemony had never faced this situation. Their conquests had always followed the same pattern. They arrived with overwhelming force. The target species resisted briefly, then recognized the futility of continued conflict. They surrendered. Their worlds became part of the hegemony. But humanity would not surrender. They would destroy themselves first. They would make their destruction so costly, so complete, that victory itself became defeat. "Fleet Commander," Tora said slowly, "withdraw our ships." "Ambassador." "Withdraw now." The commander hesitated, then nodded. The order was given. The Cathari fleet began to pull back. On the screen, Admiral Vance watched them go. Her expression did not change. "This is not over," Tora told her. "The hegemony does not accept defeat. Neither do we. We will return, with more ships, with more weapons. We will find a way to overcome your defenses without triggering your Protocol Omega." Admiral Vance nodded. "I am sure you will try, and when you do, we will be waiting. We will have new defenses, new tactics, new ways to make your victory as costly as possible. That is the thing about fighting humans, Ambassador. We learn, we adapt, and we never ever stop." The transmission ended. Tora sat in silence as the Cathari fleet withdrew. Around her, the other diplomats and military commanders were engaged in urgent discussions. How to proceed, what to report to the council, how to explain that for the first time in hegemony history they had retreated from a species that should have been trivial to conquer. But Tora was not thinking about strategy or politics. She was thinking about something Sarah had said during their first conversation. "We would rather die free than live as exhibits in your zoo." At the time, Tora had dismissed it as emotional rhetoric. Now, she was beginning to understand that it was something far more dangerous. It was a promise. Humanity would never surrender because surrender, for them, was worse than death. They had built their entire civilization around the principle that freedom was worth any price, that dignity could not be purchased with safety, that a brief life of resistance was worth more than an eternity of submission. It was irrational, it was self-destructive, it was magnificent. And it made them the most dangerous species in the galaxy. Tora made her decision. She opened a channel to the Federation Council. "This is Ambassador Tora of the Cathari diplomatic mission. I am requesting an emergency session to discuss the human situation. It is my recommendation that the hegemony abandon its campaign against humanity and instead pursue diplomatic relations." The council's response was immediate. "Ambassador, the hegemony has never abandoned a conquest. This recommendation is unprecedented." "So are humans." The session was scheduled for the following day. In the meantime, Tora requested another meeting with Captain Sarah Chen. They met in the observation lounge, the same place where they had reviewed the historical archives. Earth was visible through the window, unmarred despite the battle that had raged around it. Its blue oceans and green continents seemed impossibly peaceful. "Your people survived," Tora said, again. Sarah nodded. "We usually do." "How do you do it? How do you continue fighting when all logic says you should fail?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, then she spoke. "When I was a child, my father told me a story. It was about a human soldier from an ancient war, thousands of years ago. His army had been defeated. His comrades were dead. He was wounded, alone, facing an enemy that outnumbered him by hundreds to one. What happened to him? He died, of course. He was only human. But before he died, he managed to hold a narrow pass against the enemy long enough for civilians to escape. His sacrifice saved thousands of lives." "That is a sad story." Sarah smiled. "It depends on how you look at it. Yes, he died. Yes, his army lost. But his story is still remembered thousands of years later. His sacrifice still matters. That is what humans believe in, Ambassador. Not victory, not survival, legacy." Tora considered this. "You believe that even in death, you can achieve something meaningful." "We believe that how we face death defines who we are. A human who surrenders and lives as a slave is not really alive. A human who fights and dies free has achieved a kind of immortality." "That is difficult for my species to understand." "I know, but perhaps that is why your species has conquered so many worlds, while mine has simply survived. You understand how to win. We understand how to endure." Tora's wings shifted in a pattern that Sarah had learned to recognize as uncertainty. "The Council will want to know if there is any circumstance under which humanity would accept peace. Not surrender, peace." Sarah's eyes brightened. "That is a very different question." "Yes, it is. Humanity would accept peace with the hegemony under 3 conditions. First, recognition of human sovereignty over our existing territories. Second, establishment of formal diplomatic relations with equal status. Third, a mutual defense agreement that treats humans as allies rather than subjects. Those terms would require the hegemony to treat humanity as equals. That has never been done. Then it would be a first." Sarah's voice was gentle but firm. "Ambassador, the universe is full of threats that neither of our species can face alone. The void may return. Other dangers may emerge. Humanity has survived by refusing to surrender. Perhaps we could survive even better by working together. Tora stood and walked to the window. Outside, the stars continued their eternal dance. I will present your terms to the council, she said finally. I cannot guarantee they will be accepted. I would not expect you to, but the offer stands. And if the council refuses, if the hegemony continues its campaign? Sarah joined her at the window. Then we will fight. We will lose ships and soldiers and perhaps even worlds. We will suffer losses that no rational species would accept, and we will never ever stop. Even if it means extinction. Especially then, because extinction while fighting is still better than existence without freedom. Tora made a sound that her translator could not identify. It might have been respect. It might have been fear. Perhaps it was both. I think I am beginning to understand you, she said. That makes you unique among non-humans. Perhaps, or perhaps it simply means I have learned to pay attention. The two representatives of their species stood together, watching the stars. Behind them, Earth turned slowly, a fragile world that had survived more than any calculation could explain. Tomorrow the diplomatic process would continue, the council would debate, the hegemony would consider its options, the future remained uncertain. But one thing was clear. Humanity would not surrender, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. And that simple fact, that impossible stubbornness, that irrational refusal to accept defeat, had changed everything. The Federation had wanted to understand why humans never gave up. Now they knew. And knowing, they would have to decide. Continue the futile effort to conquer a species that could not be conquered, or find another way. Tora had made her recommendation. Peace was possible if both sides were willing to try. Whether that would be enough remained to be seen. But as Sarah had said, humans specialized in hope, even when hope was irrational, even when hope defied all logic. Perhaps, Tora thought, that was the most dangerous weapon of all. The Federation Council convened 3 days later in the Grand Assembly Chamber of Station Prime. Representatives from 47 member species filled the curved tiers of seating, their varied forms creating a living tapestry of galactic diversity. Crystalline Cathari sat beside the aquatic men, who were contained in mobile water spheres. The insectoid Vrex clicked and buzzed in their allocated section. The ancient Thessari, beings of pure energy contained in artificial shells, hummed with frequencies that only they could hear. At the center of the chamber, Ambassador Tora stood before them all. Honored representatives, she began, her wings spreading in the formal gesture of important address. I have been asked to explain why the Cathari hegemony recommends abandoning our campaign against humanity. The answer is simple, but it challenges everything we believe about species psychology and conflict resolution. She activated the holographic display behind her. Images of human history began to play. The Dreth War, the Silence Plague, the Void War, the faces of human soldiers, scientists, leaders, and ordinary citizens who had faced impossible odds and refused to accept defeat. Humans do not understand surrender, Tora continued. This is not a cultural trait that can be overcome with sufficient pressure. This is not a negotiating position that will soften with time. This is a fundamental aspect of their species psychology, as basic to them as survival instinct is to us. The Vrex representative raised a forelimb. Ambassador, you describe a species that is irrational and self-destructive. Such species typically do not survive long enough to become a problem. You would think so. And yet humans have survived 17 extinction-level events in 300 years. They have outlasted the Dreth Empire, the Silence Plague, and the Void. They have accomplished this not despite their irrationality, but because of it. The chamber stirred with confusion and doubt. Tora pressed on. When the Dreth demanded their surrender, humans invented new weapons and guerrilla tactics. When the Silence Plague threatened their minds, they chose brain damage over death. When the Void consumed their consciousness, they sang songs until the entities withdrew. In each case, humans found solutions that no rational species would have considered because no rational species would have continued trying. The Thessari representative pulsed with communication frequencies. You suggest that irrationality is an advantage. I suggest that what we call irrationality, humans call hope. And hope, it turns out, is a more powerful force than logic. She displayed the final footage from the recent battle. Admiral Vance's face, bloody and defiant. Protocol Omega, the threat to destroy their own homeworld. When we attacked Earth, humanity was prepared to burn their planet rather than see it conquered. Not as a bluff, not as a negotiating tactic. They had already evacuated their essential population. They would have done it. The chamber fell silent. "We can conquer their worlds," Tora said. "We can destroy their fleets, bombard their colonies, reduce their population to nothing. But we cannot make them surrender. And as long as they continue fighting, they continue adapting. They continue learning. They continue finding new ways to make our victories hollow." She turned to face the full council. "The question before us is not whether we can defeat humanity. The question is whether the cost of defeating them is worth what we would gain. My assessment, after extensive study of their history and culture, is that it is not." The debate that followed lasted 14 hours. Species that had never agreed on anything found themselves united in their confusion about humans. Some advocated for escalation. Surely, with enough force, any species could be broken. Others pointed to the historical record. Every escalation against humanity had produced unexpected consequences. The Dreth had lost an empire partially because they underestimated human stubbornness. The Vrex representative proposed a solution that had worked against other difficult species. Targeted genetic modification. Remove the psychological trait that prevents surrender. Humans would become compliant within a generation. The Thessari rejected this immediately. Such modification would fundamentally alter the species. The resulting beings would not be humans. They would be puppets wearing human form. Is that not acceptable? Many conquered species have been modified to improve their utility. Not without their consent. The Thessari memory is long. We remember what forced modification did to the Kel, to the Orath, to dozens of species who are now extinct in any meaningful sense. We will not support this. The debate shifted to containment. If humans could not be conquered or modified, perhaps they could be isolated. Build barriers around human space. Prevent their expansion. Wait for them to destroy themselves, as many predicted they eventually would. This proposal gained more support, until a junior analyst from the Men delegation raised an uncomfortable point. According to our projections, human population and technological development will exceed current Federation averages within 200 years. If we contain them now, we create an enemy that grows stronger while we remain static. When they eventually break containment, and they will break it, they will be far more dangerous than they are today. The discussion circled back to Tora's recommendation: peace, diplomatic recognition, alliance. The hegemony does not make alliances with inferior species, the Cathari military commander objected. The hegemony has never faced a species like humans, Tora responded. Perhaps it is time for new approaches. The vote was called just before dawn, station prime time. 23 species voted for continued conflict. 24 species voted for diplomatic engagement. The council had spoken. Tora was appointed lead negotiator. She began the journey back to Earth the same day. Captain Sarah Chen was waiting when the diplomatic vessel arrived. She looked tired, as if she had not slept since the battle, but her eyes were bright with cautious optimism. The council accepted our terms. The council accepted negotiation, Tora corrected. The specific terms remain to be discussed, but yes, the hegemony is prepared to consider peace rather than conquest. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them again, there was moisture at the corners. Do you know how long we have waited for this? How many generations of humans have dreamed of a day when we would not be fighting for survival? I can imagine. No, Ambassador, with respect, you cannot. Your species has never faced what we have faced. You have never known the desperation, the fear, the constant awareness that extinction is one bad decision away. Sarah's voice broke slightly. We are so tired, Ambassador, so very tired. Tora felt something she had not expected, sympathy, perhaps even kinship. Then let us make sure you can rest. Let us build a peace that lasts. The negotiations took 6 months. They were the most difficult diplomatic proceedings in Federation history, not because of hostility or bad faith, but because humans and the Council had such fundamentally different ways of thinking. The Federation valued stability, predictability, control. They wanted agreements that specified every possible contingency, that left no room for ambiguity or surprise. Humans valued flexibility, adaptability, freedom. They wanted agreements that established principles rather than rules, that allowed for growth and change. Finding common ground required both sides to learn from each other. Tora learned that human promises once given were held sacred. They might argue about interpretations, might debate applications, but they would never simply break their word. This reliability came from the same source as their stubbornness. When humans committed to something, they committed completely. Sarah learned that Federation species, despite their apparent rigidity, genuinely wanted peace. They had seen too much conflict, too much destruction. They had built their civilization on the principle of avoiding war whenever possible. Their demands for detailed agreements came not from distrust, but from a deep desire to prevent misunderstandings that could lead to violence. The final treaty was signed on the anniversary of the Dreth withdrawal from Earth. It was a date humans celebrated as Survival Day, and it seemed appropriate for this new beginning. The treaty recognized human sovereignty over their existing territories, as requested. It established formal diplomatic relations with equal status. It created a mutual defense agreement that treated humans as allies. But it also included something that neither side had originally proposed. The Human Integration Initiative, Torah explained to the gathered representatives, will place human advisors in every major Federation military and diplomatic installation. Their role will be to provide alternative perspectives, to challenge assumptions, to ask the questions that rational species might not think to ask. You want humans to teach us how to be irrational, the Vrex representative asked, clearly confused. We want humans to teach us how to hope, Torah corrected. In my time among them I have come to understand something. Our rationality is powerful. It has built great civilizations, created wonders of technology, unified dozens of species under common governance. But it has also made us predictable, cautious, perhaps too quick to accept that some things cannot be done. She looked at Sarah, who stood beside her. Humans believe that anything is possible. This belief is often wrong, but sometimes, just sometimes, it allows them to achieve things that should have been impossible. That is a valuable trait, one that we should cultivate, not destroy. Admiral Helena Vance, who had traveled from Earth for the signing, stepped forward. Her wounds from the battle had healed, but the scars remained. She wore them proudly. For 300 years humanity has been fighting alone. We have survived, yes, but survival is not the same as thriving. We have spent so much of our energy on conflict that we have had little left for the things that matter: art, science, philosophy, family. Her voice grew stronger. This treaty gives us something we have never had before, a future without constant threat, a chance to become something more than survivors. We do not take this lightly. She turned to address the full council. There will be those among humanity who distrust this peace. We have been betrayed before by other species, by circumstances, by the universe itself. Trust does not come easily to us, but we are willing to try. We are willing to hope. Even though hope is irrational, the Thessari representative asked. Admiral Vance smiled. It was the same smile that Torah had learned to recognize, the one that carried something old and fierce and unbreakable. Especially because hope is irrational, that is what makes it powerful. The treaty was signed. The chamber erupted in the various forms of celebration that 48 different species used to express approval. And somewhere, watching through a viewscreen on a damaged orbital station above Earth, a young human child asked her mother what was happening. "We made friends," her mother said, tears streaming down her face. "After all this time, we finally made friends." The child did not understand why her mother was crying, or why the strange aliens on the screen were making so much noise. But she understood that something important had happened. "Is the war over?" she asked. Her mother held her close. "Yes, baby, the war is over." Forever? It was a question that no honest person could answer with certainty. But the child's mother, like all humans, specialized in hope. "Forever," she said. And in that moment, despite all logic and probability, it felt like the truth. 10 years passed. The Human Integration Initiative had grown from a tentative experiment to an essential institution. Human advisors served throughout Federation space, bringing their unique perspective to challenges that had stymied other species for centuries. On the Vrex homeworld, a human agricultural specialist named Marcus Webb introduced the concept of crop rotation. The Vrex had been struggling with soil depletion for generations. Their rational approach had led them to increasingly complex chemical solutions that created as many problems as they solved. Marcus simply suggested they try something different. "Why would we plant different crops in the same field?" the Vrex agricultural minister had asked, clearly confused. "Because the soil needs variety. Different plants take different nutrients, leave different things behind. If you keep planting the same thing, you exhaust the ground. That is inefficient. We would need to maintain multiple types of crops, multiple harvesting systems, multiple storage facilities." Marcus shrugged. "Maybe, but your current system is failing. Maybe efficient is not the same as effective." The Vrex tried his suggestion, expecting failure. Within 3 growing cycles, their crop yields had increased by 40%. Similar stories emerged throughout Federation space. Human creativity, human stubbornness, human refusal to accept that problems were unsolvable found solutions that rational analysis had missed. But the most significant change was not in agriculture or technology. It was in attitude. Species that had spent millennia accepting certain limitations began to question them. If humans could survive the silence plague through brain damage, perhaps other impossible challenges could be overcome. If humans could negotiate with the void through music, perhaps other incomprehensible entities could be reached. The Federation began to change, slowly, cautiously, but unmistakably. Ambassador Tora, now High Ambassador to Human Space, watched these changes with a mixture of pride and concern. She had advocated for this outcome, but she had not fully anticipated its consequences. "You seem worried," Captain Sarah Chen observed. They met regularly now, their initial diplomatic relationship having evolved into something closer to friendship. "I am uncertain," Tora admitted. "The Federation was built on predictability, stability. Now we are becoming more like humans, more willing to take risks, more willing to hope." "Is that a bad thing?" "I do not know. Your way has allowed you to survive impossible odds, but it has also led to tremendous suffering. The Dreth War, the Silence Plague, the casualties of the Void War that are still classified." Sarah nodded slowly. "You are right. Being human is not easy. Hope is not free. We pay for our stubbornness in blood and tears." "Then why do you recommend it to others?" "Because the alternative is worse." Sarah looked out at the stars, a habit she had developed over years of space travel. "Before we met other species, humans asked ourselves a question. Are we alone in the universe? When we discovered the answer was no, we asked a different question. Are we welcome in the universe? And what answer did you find? Neither yes nor no. The universe is indifferent. It does not care whether humanity survives or perishes. It does not care whether we are happy or suffering. It simply exists, vast and ancient and utterly unconcerned with our fate." Tora's wings shifted in confusion. This is not a comforting philosophy. "No, but it is a liberating one. If the universe does not care about us, then we are free to care about ourselves. We are free to create our own meaning, our own purpose, our own reasons for existing. We are free to hope, even when hope is irrational because there is no cosmic authority telling us we should not." She turned to face Tora directly. "That is what we offer the Federation, not a guarantee of success, not a promise of safety, just the freedom to try, to fail, to try again, to keep trying until something works. And if nothing works?" Sarah smiled. "Then we die trying, which for humans is not the worst outcome. The worst outcome is giving up. The worst outcome is accepting that we are beaten, that we have no choices, that our fate is determined by others." Tora considered this for a long moment. "I think I finally understand your species. You are not fearless. You are not invincible. You simply value freedom more than safety. More than anything, freedom to choose our own path, freedom to make our own mistakes, freedom to determine our own future, even if that future is short and painful. Even if that freedom leads to extinction. Especially then, because a brief life of freedom is worth more than an eternity of slavery. That is what we believe. That is what makes us human." The alarm began to sound. Tora checked her communication device. Her face went pale. "What is it?" Sarah asked. "The monitoring stations at the edge of human space. They have detected something." "What kind of something?" "Energy signatures unlike anything in our records. Massive, approaching at speeds that should be impossible." Sarah's expression shifted. The diplomat fell away, replaced by the soldier she had once been. "The void." "No, our sensors can detect the void now, thanks to human modifications. This is something else, something new." They hurried to the command center, where human and Cathari officers worked side by side at monitoring stations. The main screen showed a map of human space, with a cluster of red dots approaching the outer colonies. Admiral Vance appeared on a communication screen. She was older now, her hair completely white, but her eyes were as sharp as ever. "We have visual confirmation," she reported. "Ships, if you can call them that, bigger than anything we have ever seen. We are estimating crew complements in the millions." "Have they communicated?" "Yes, once." The Admiral's face was grim. "They call themselves the Eternal. They say they have been watching us for thousands of years, waiting for the right moment. They say that moment has come." "What do they want?" "Everything. They want to harvest all life in the galaxy. They claim it is their right, their purpose, their destiny." Tora felt something she rarely experienced: fear, true primal fear. How do we respond? Admiral Vance looked at her through the screen. Despite the impossible odds, despite the overwhelming threat, there was something in her expression that Tora had learned to recognize. It was hope. We do what humans always do, the Admiral said. We fight, we adapt, we refuse to surrender, and we hope that somewhere, somehow, there is a way to win. Even against this. Especially against this. Because if we give up now, we were never worthy of survival in the first place. The Admiral turned to issue orders to her fleet. The screen shifted to show human ships beginning to mobilize, forming defensive lines, preparing for a battle they could not possibly win. Tora turned to Sarah. What do we do? Sarah's smile was sad but unwavering. We stand with them, we fight with them, and if we have to, we die with them. That is what allies do. Even if we cannot win. Victory is not the only thing worth fighting for. Sometimes you fight simply because fighting is the right thing to do, because giving up would betray everything you believe in, because hope, even irrational hope, is better than despair. Tora made her decision. She opened a channel to the Federation Council. This is High Ambassador Tora. Humanity faces a new threat. They have asked for our help. I am recommending that we provide it. Ambassador, we have seen the intelligence reports. This enemy is beyond anything we have faced. The logical response is to withdraw, to protect our own territories, to let humanity fight their own battle. That would be the rational response, yes. But I have spent 10 years among humans. I have learned something about their way of thinking. Sometimes rational is not right. Sometimes the right thing to do is the thing that logic says you should not do. You are asking us to risk our entire civilization on human stubbornness. Tora looked at Sarah, at the human ships on the screen, at the impossible odds they were preparing to face. I am asking us to risk our civilization on hope. It is what humans would do, and I have come to believe that their way is better than ours. The council debated, but this time the debate was shorter. The Human Integration Initiative had done its work. Federation species had learned to question their assumptions, to consider alternatives to hope. The vote was nearly unanimous. The Federation would fight alongside humanity. Whatever came next, they would face it together. And somewhere in the depths of space, the ancient enemy called the Eternal detected the response to their ultimatum. They had expected surrender, or at least desperate negotiation. Instead, they received a message from humanity. We do not surrender, we do not negotiate with those who threaten us. We fight, always, no matter the odds. The Eternal had harvested countless species throughout the galaxy. They had never encountered this response before. They would learn. One way or another, they would learn. The first battle against the Eternal lasted 72 hours. Human and Federation ships fought side by side for the first time in history. They used every weapon they had, every tactic they knew, every trick they could devise. Against any other enemy, their resistance would have been overwhelming. Against the Eternal, it was barely enough to slow them down. The enemy ships absorbed energy weapons like sponges absorbing water. Kinetic projectiles bounced off their hulls without leaving marks. Nuclear missiles detonated against their shields with no visible effect. But humans had faced impossible odds before. Admiral Vance commanded the combined fleet from her flagship, the last of the vessels that had been built during the Void War. She watched the battle unfold on her tactical display, looking for weaknesses, opportunities, anything that could be exploited. Their ships are organic, one of her analysts reported. Living tissue. That is why our weapons are not working. They heal faster than we can damage them. What kills living things? Heat, cold, poison, disease, age. Vance nodded. Can we infect them? We would need to understand their biology first. That could take years of research. We do not have years. We might not have days. Captain Sarah Chen had joined the fleet despite her nominal civilian status. She stood beside the Admiral, watching the same displays. The Void, she said quietly. They were drawn to consciousness, to song, to emotional expression. The Eternal are not the Void. No, but they are organic, living, and living things respond to stimuli in ways that machines do not. Admiral Vance looked at her. What are you thinking? During the Void War, we discovered that our emotions had effects we did not understand. Joy drove the Void away. What if other emotions have other effects? You want to attack them with feelings. I want to try everything. Is that not what humans do? The Admiral considered this for a long moment. Then she began issuing orders. Throughout the fleet, human crews began a new kind of warfare. They played music at maximum volume, broadcasting it on every frequency. They screamed defiance into their communicators. They laughed, they cried, they expressed every emotion they could summon. The Eternal ships hesitated. It was not much, a slight slowing in their advance, a brief pause in their attack patterns, but it was something. Analysis, Vance demanded. Their biological readings are fluctuating. We are affecting them somehow. We do not know how. Keep doing it. Whatever is working, do more of it. The battle continued. Human ships died. Federation vessels exploded. The casualties mounted with every passing hour. But the Eternal were no longer winning easily. By the end of the second day, something remarkable had happened. The enemy advance had stopped. The Eternal ships had formed a defensive perimeter, no longer attacking but no longer advancing either. They are analyzing us, High Ambassador Tora observed. She had remained aboard the command vessel, coordinating Federation reinforcements. They have never encountered anything like this. Neither have we, Admiral Vance replied, but we are used to improvising. The breakthrough came on the third day. A young human scientist named Dr. Yuki Tanaka, the great-great-granddaughter of the admiral who had defied the Dreth centuries ago, discovered something crucial about the Eternal's biology. They are not just organic, she explained in an emergency briefing. They are connected. Every ship, every creature, every cell is part of a single vast consciousness. They think together, feel together, experience everything together. How does that help us? It means they have never experienced isolation. They have never been alone. And our emotions, our individual experiences are completely alien to them. When we broadcast our feelings, we are showing them what it means to be separate, individual, alone. And that hurts them. Not hurts, confuses, fascinates, terrifies. They have been alive for millions of years, but they have never understood what it means to be a single being, facing the universe without the support of a collective consciousness. Admiral Vance saw the opportunity immediately. Can we use that? I believe so. If we can intensify our emotional broadcasts, focus them, make the Eternal truly understand what individual experience feels like, we might be able to overwhelm them. Not with weapons, with perspective. It was the strangest weapon humanity had ever deployed. Across the fleet, crews were instructed to focus on their most powerful memories. Joy, grief, love, fear, hope. They concentrated on these feelings, experienced them as intensely as they could, and broadcast them toward the Eternal. The effect was immediate. The enemy ships began to shudder. Their organic hulls rippled as if in pain. Their advance not only stopped but began to reverse. And then something unexpected happened. A message came from the Eternal, not a demand, not a threat, a question. Why do you feel so much? Why do you endure such pain, such loss, such fear? How do you survive the loneliness of individual existence? Admiral Vance responded personally. We survive because we choose to, because the alternative is worse, because even in our darkest moments, we can hope for something better. Hope is irrational. Your existence is brief, your suffering immense, your future uncertain. What is there to hope for? Everything, tomorrow, the chance to see our children grow, the possibility that things might improve, the knowledge that even if we fail, we tried. The Eternal were silent for a long moment, then another message came. We have consumed countless species throughout the galaxy. We have absorbed their knowledge, their memories, their experiences, but we have never understood them. They surrendered. They accepted their fate. They did not fight. Humans do not surrender. Yes, we are beginning to understand this, but we do not understand why. Admiral Vance looked at Sarah. Sarah nodded. Let me try, the captain said. She opened a direct channel to the Eternal. You asked why we do not surrender. The answer is simple, but it may be hard for you to understand. We do not surrender because surrender means giving up hope, and for humans, hope is more important than survival. Explain. When we hope, we imagine a future that is better than the present. We work toward that future, even when we know we might never see it. We sacrifice for our children, for our descendants, for people we will never meet. We believe that our suffering has meaning if it contributes to something larger than ourselves. That is irrational. Yes, but it is also beautiful, and it is what makes us human. The Eternal processed this. Their collective consciousness struggled with concepts it had never encountered: individual hope, personal sacrifice, meaning beyond survival. We have lived for millions of years, they finally said. We have consumed galaxies. We believed we understood all forms of life. We were wrong. What will you do now? The question hung in the void between stars. We do not know. We need to consider what you have shown us. We need to understand these feelings you have shared. This may take time. How much time? We do not know that either, but we will not continue our harvest, not until we understand. The eternal ships began to withdraw, not retreating in defeat but pulling back to consider, to process, to learn. Admiral Vance watched them go. She had expected to die in this battle, had expected humanity to fight to the last ship and the last soldier. Instead, they had achieved something impossible. They had made the enemy think. High Ambassador Tora joined her on the command deck. That was remarkable. You defeated them without destroying them. We did not defeat them. We confused them. There is a difference. But they are leaving. For now, they will return eventually, and when they do, we need to be ready. How do you prepare for an enemy that cannot be defeated by weapons? Admiral Vance smiled. It was the smile that Tora had learned to recognize, the one that carried something old and fierce and unbreakable. We do what we always do. We hope, we adapt, we refuse to give up. And if that is not enough, then we try something else, and something else after that. We keep trying until we find a way or until we are gone. That is the human way. Tora's wings folded against her back in the gesture of respect. I have served the Federation for 2 centuries. I have seen many species, many conflicts, many outcomes, but I have never seen anything like humanity. I will take that as a compliment. It is the highest compliment I am capable of giving. Admiral Vance turned back to the viewport. The stars stretched out before her, vast and cold and indifferent. But somewhere among them, human colonies were celebrating their survival. Human children were being born, human dreams were being dreamed, human hopes were being hoped. The Eternal asked why we feel so much, she said quietly. I think I know the answer now. What is it? We feel because we are small, because we are brief, because we know that our time is limited and precious. The Eternal have lived for millions of years. They have never faced their own mortality. They have never had to choose what to do with a finite existence. And humans have always known they would die. Yes, and that knowledge, that awareness of our own ending, is what makes us fight so hard for every moment. Every day is precious because we know there will be a last day. Every relationship is valuable because we know it will end. Every achievement matters because we know it will be forgotten. Tora considered this. That is a sad philosophy. No, it is a hopeful one, because it means that everything we do matters. Every choice, every action, every moment of defiance against the darkness. We are not just surviving, we are living. And living, truly living, is worth fighting for. The battle was over. The war perhaps was just beginning. But for now, humanity and the Federation stood together, united by hope and stubbornness and the refusal to surrender. The Eternal would return. Other threats would emerge. The universe would continue to be vast and dangerous and indifferent. But humanity would be waiting. As they always had been, as they always would be. Because that was what humans did. They waited, they hoped, they fought. And they never, ever gave up. The Federation diplomats who had come to understand why humanity never surrendered had found their answer. It was not courage or strength or superior technology. It was simply this. Humans believed that tomorrow could be better than today, and they were willing to fight for that belief, no matter the cost. That was the human way. And now it was the Federation's way too. Together they would face whatever came next. Together they would hope. And together perhaps they would survive. 100 years after the Eternal withdrew, the galaxy had changed in ways that no one could have predicted. The Federation had grown to include 93 species, many of them former subjects of the Cathari hegemony who had requested membership after witnessing humanity's example. The old hierarchies had crumbled, replaced by something more equal, more hopeful, more human. Human influence had spread throughout known space, not through conquest or domination but through something more subtle and more powerful, ideas, philosophy, the simple belief that tomorrow could be better than today. The Human Integration Initiative had evolved into the Galactic Hope Project, an organization dedicated to spreading the lessons humanity had learned through centuries of impossible survival. Its representatives served on every inhabited world, teaching not just tactics and technology, but something more fundamental. They taught hope. High Ambassador Tora, now the oldest living Cathari, observed all of this from her retirement residence on Earth. She had chosen to spend her final years on the world that had changed everything, watching the blue oceans and green continents that had somehow survived so much. Captain Sarah Chen visited her regularly. Sarah was old now too, her dark hair turned silver, her face lined with the years. But her eyes were still bright with the fire that Tora had come to know so well. "The Eternal have returned," Sarah said during one of their conversations. Tora's wings rustled with concern. "Are they hostile?" "No, they have changed. They spent a century processing what we showed them, what we shared with them. They say they finally understand." "Understand what?" Sarah smiled. "Individual existence, hope, the beauty of a finite life. They say that our perspective has transformed them. They no longer wish to consume, they wish to learn." And humanity's response? "We have offered to teach them, not just our technology or our tactics, but our way of seeing the universe. They have accepted." Tora was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was soft with wonder. "When I first came to study your species, I expected to find weaknesses we could exploit. Instead, I found strengths I could not have imagined. You have changed everything, Sarah, everything. We did not do it alone. You listened when others would have dismissed us. You advocated when others wanted to continue the war. You believed in the possibility of peace. You made that peace possible. Together, it was together." They sat in companionable silence, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and gold. Around them, the sounds of a living world continued. Birds singing, wind rustling through trees, children laughing somewhere in the distance. "I have spent my life trying to understand your species," Tora said finally, "and I think I have finally succeeded." "What is your conclusion?" "Humans are not rational. You are not predictable. You are not strong in any conventional sense. But you have something that no other species in the galaxy possesses." "What is that?" Tora's wings spread in the gesture of deep respect. "You have the courage to hope when hope is foolish, to fight when fighting is futile, to believe when belief is irrational, and somehow, impossibly, that courage makes things happen that should not be possible." Sarah nodded slowly. "That is what we are. That is all we are. Small, fragile creatures who refuse to accept that the universe is bigger than our dreams. And that refusal has saved you, 17 times. 18 now, but who is counting?" They both laughed. It was the laugh of old friends who had seen too much and survived anyway. The next morning, Tora died peacefully in her sleep. She was the last of the original diplomatic delegation, the last living witness to the first contact between humanity and the Cathari hegemony. Her funeral was attended by representatives from every species in the Federation. Humans and Cathari stood side by side, mourning together, honoring together, hopping together. Sarah gave the eulogy. "Ambassador Tora came to Earth to understand why we never surrender," she said. "She spent 100 years searching for the answer, and in the end she found it, not in our weapons or our tactics, but in our hearts." She paused, looking out at the assembled crowd. "We never surrender because we cannot imagine a future without hope. Even in our darkest moments, even facing impossible odds, we believe that tomorrow might be better. And that belief, that stubborn, irrational, beautiful belief, is what makes us human." The crowd listened in silence. Tora understood this. She embraced it. She made it her own. And in doing so, she showed us that hope is not just a human trait. It is a choice that any species can make if they have the courage. Sarah's voice grew stronger. "The galaxy is vast and dangerous and indifferent. It does not care whether we survive or perish. But we care. We care about each other, about our children, about the future. And that caring, that hope, is the most powerful force in the universe." She raised her hand in a gesture that had become universal throughout the Federation. A fist held high against the sky, a symbol of defiance, of stubbornness, of hope. For Tora, for humanity, for every species that has learned to hope, we will never surrender, we will never give up. We will face whatever comes together and we will find a way. Throughout the crowd, hands rose in response. Human hands, Cathari limbs, Vrex forelimbs, the varied appendages of 93 species united in a single gesture of hope. The funeral ended, the crowd dispersed, life continued. And somewhere in the galaxy, a young human child asked her mother about the strange new species that had come to learn from humanity. "They are called the Eternal," her mother explained. "They used to be our enemies, now they are our students." "What are you teaching them?" "How to hope." The child thought about this. Is it hard to learn? Very hard, but also very important, because without hope, life is just survival, and survival is not enough. What is enough? Her mother smiled. It was the same smile that had been passed down through generations of humans, the one that carried something old and fierce and unbreakable. Living, really living, fighting for a better tomorrow even when today is hard, believing that things can improve even when everything seems lost, that is what is enough. The child nodded solemnly. She did not fully understand, but she knew it was important. Somewhere among the stars, the Eternal were learning, the Federation was growing, humanity was thriving. And hope, that stubborn, irrational, beautiful force, was spreading throughout the galaxy. It had started with a single species that refused to surrender, a species that faced impossible odds and kept fighting anyway, a species that believed in tomorrow even when today seemed like the end. Now, 100 years later, that belief had changed everything. The Federation diplomats had learned why humanity never surrendered. And in learning, they had found something they had never expected. They had found hope. The galaxy would never be the same.